Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and I'd like to welcome you to my lecture on Chapter 4 of the Kathy Schwalbe book on project management. And the title of Chapter 4 is Project Integration Management. So the first three chapters were on various topics, but the last 10 are on some one of the knowledge areas. Okay? The first one, and probably the one that we consider the most important, is called Project Integration Management. It's sort of a dumping ground for all the really important stuff that you have to know in order to manage a project well. It's probably the knowledge area that is a bit of the secret sauce. It's pulling everything together, that kind of stuff. Okay, so here we go, project integration management. So the ability to pull it all together is really the essence of the project manager job. So project managers must coordinate all of the other knowledge areas throughout the project's life cycle. Many new project managers have trouble looking at the big picture and they want to focus on too many details. And there's a case in our book that illustrates that. And project integration management is not the same thing as software integration. So this word integration is a popular word. Take things that are not together in the beginning and bring them together in some kind of a positive way. So software integration, often called systems integration, is a popular trend in which users of information technology are expected to not build all their solutions from scratch. Instead, they're expected to integrate their solution from some things that are pre-built and available off the shelf, and some things that are custom built. And this practice of building systems in this almost general contractor kind of way has been called systems integration. Here they're calling it software integration, but that's not really the buzz phrase. Project integration management uses the integration word because it's on the good list, but still, it's the same kind of idea. We're pulling things together from the parts, and what we're trying to say here with this knowledge or skill area is it's not enough to know just the rest of the knowledge areas. It's not enough to know how to put together the scope for a project. It's not enough to know how to estimate the time for a project, or to estimate the costs for a project, or to come up with an approach to quality, or to manage the risk. That it's the job of the project manager to pull these all together. So not only do you have to know about all the parts, but you have to know how to pull them together into, in a planning sense, a coordinated set of documents, and in a project sense, a successful series of events. Okay, so this integration is a word used in the same sense here as it is in software and systems integration, but it's just not the same term. At the beginning of these knowledge area chapters, we typically are going to want to identify the processes that are involved in that knowledge area. And then we're going to tell you which of the process groups that they hail from. So These include developing the project charter, developing the project management plan, directing and managing the project work. Next, monitoring and controlling the project work, performing integrated change control, and closing the project. Okay, and we're going to talk about each of these in a little more depth, so I'm not even going to read the rest of the sentences that are in the bullet points. Now, how do these processes fit into the process group scheme? Well, developing the project charter is a process that fits into the initiating process group. Developing the project management plan falls into planning. Direct and manage project work falls into executing. Monitoring and control project work falls into, not surprisingly, monitoring and controlling. And close project or phase, which I'm not sure we had on that list, and if we did, I missed it, falls into closing. Okay, so these are all secret sauce, pull things together, most important things that we do, and they're all part of this integration management process knowledge area. And again, we've been through the processes, and we've explored to which process groups do these processes belong. So we're going to do a bit of a segue here. Okay, so we've given you an idea of everything that has to go on. Now, the first thing that we need to do before we initiate the project is we need to select a project. Okay, and so this is really a pre-project management activities. This is sort of pre-initiation, as we talked about in a previous chapter. Okay, so what kind of processes go on in a mature, healthy organization that help that organization select the projects that it's going to choose to initiate and carry on? Well, the strategic planning process is pretty important to project selection. So strategic planning is an activity for management that's been popular since, I'd say, probably the 1960s is when it really got kicked off, and it's still a pretty highly regarded practice. Okay, and the idea of strategic planning is that if you don't, how does the phrase goes? If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Okay, it's another truism that applies to this activity is an organization can't be all things to all people. So sort of the premises out of which strategic planning grows is involve things like this. If you try to be all things to all people with your organization, you are not going to be a top player. That the organizations that are high performers are aware of their strengths and their weaknesses and how they fit into the world, and they come up with a strategy that capitalizes on those things, and they spend their time, money, and attention wisely, and that's what leads them to be high performers. Okay? So they have a strategic plan. Well, how do people come up with this strategic plan? Well, probably one of the most popular approaches is called SWOT. And a SWOT is just an acronym that comes from strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so here's how it goes. It's a reflective process. You take a group of people and you try to assess your own organization's strengths and weaknesses. You try to document those. And then you try to look into the world, the environment that your organization operates in, and you try to look at opportunities there and threats there. And then, having documented all of that, what you try to do is to come up with a plan for the strategy of your organization that capitalizes on your strengths. It minimizes the impact of your weaknesses. It capitalizes on as many opportunities as can be found in the environment. And it avoids as many threats as possible. So this is an optimization strategy. This is an optimization approach that gives birth to your strategic plan. Okay, so knowing your strategic plan, then you ought to be able to identify potential projects. You ought to be able to take all the potential projects that you think of and say, well, how does that fit into our strategy? Okay. And for instance, maybe it fits into our strengths and capitalizes on opportunities that we see. However, people propose projects all the time that are sort of attractive to them, but are kind of subject to the weaknesses of the organization and the threats in the environment. So you can certainly think of projects that you might be interested in that are not well aligned with your strategic plan that you built using your SWOT analysis. So what you want to do is you want to come up with this strategic plan. You want to identify potential projects. You want to use realistic methods to select which projects to work on that include things like how well aligned are they with your strategic plan. And then you want to have a formal project initiation by issuing a project charter. Okay, so we want to identify a project and then we want to start the initiation. Okay, so here's a diagram on slide number 7, a classic kind of a mind mapping analysis. These kinds of diagrams are used for SWOT analyses all the time. So in the very middle, we have SWOT analysis, and then we've got 4 parts: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then we break them down into subparts, and then we break them down into subparts. And they become our worldview, okay? And then from the worldview, we cobble together our strategic plan, and then we compare our projects to, ideally, we want to find parts of the strategic plan that they're well aligned with. And that's what they're trying to illustrate here with the slide. There is a formal approach to planning IT projects that's called information technology planning. And this, if it wasn't invented by IBM, it's certainly promoted by IBM. And when IBM got into big time IT, their concern was that people wouldn't find enough uses for their computers to create a market for them. So they put together a methodology for information technology planning, and they had a school that client executives would go to, in which they would do a little bit of strategic planning, or certainly they would bring their strategic plan with them, and then they would try to go through information technology planning, which gave rise to projects that people would be able to work on. Okay, so they have it here as a pyramid. At the very top, you begin with an information technology strategic planning. So if you had an overall organization strategic plan, it's not uncommon for each of the functional areas of your organization to try to come up with a strategic plan that's well aligned with the overall strategic plan for the organization. Then they do something they call business area analysis, where they document key business processes that would be able to benefit from more or different information technology. And then from that, they have project planning. So they define potential projects, define potential project scope, the benefits and the constraints. And then they do resource allocation, select information technology projects, and assign resources. So in some organizations, they do this formally, and others less formally. In some, they do it maybe once every couple of years, and some they do it every year. In some organizations, they have a group of people that's dedicated to it full time, maybe 2 people or 5 people or 10 people, who are forever refining the information technology plan. Okay, so however continuous or formal or informal something like this might be in your organization, this is a process that could tie projects and commitments to projects to strategic plans. So here we're going to propose a best practices. So a 2013 survey identified companies most admired for their ability to apply IT-related business capabilities for competitive advantage. And the best practices that these companies seem to have in common included customer-driven IT, the IT can help to develop the branding and help in customer recruitment, and they have some kind of a continuous improvement process. And those all sound like pretty reasonable things to me. Now, methods for selecting projects. Usually, in your typical organization, we identify more projects than we have the resources to commit to. So then we need a method for narrowing down the list and deciding which projects that are currently going on we want to continue, which we might want to stop, and the ones that we haven't started yet, which ones we want to start now, which ones we may want to have waiting in the wings for when we have time and attention, and which ones maybe we're going to just say we're not doing any time at all, okay? So we need some sort of a method to select projects from the candidates. Now, there are a bunch of different approaches to this, and they include the following: focusing on broad organizational needs, categorizing information technology projects. Usually that comes down to some kind of a weighted scoring model. Weighted scoring comes later. So categorizing in this approach is a little more broad than weighted scoring. So categorizing, wait and see. We'll talk about what that means. Financial analysis, and the financial analysis that we're going to recommend is called net present value, using a weighted scoring model. And there's a proprietary approach to project selection called balanced scorecard. And we talk about it a bit in the textbook, but here we're just going to point you to where you can find out more. So what do we mean by broad organizational needs? Well, especially for infrastructure kinds of projects, it's sometimes hard to justify them. Okay. On one hand, it's probably doable to figure out what the incremental cost would be for a new email system for your company. Okay. On the other hand, how are you going to quantify the benefits? I mean, it's a piece of infrastructure. Okay. It's hard to remember when we didn't have it, right? Most people, at least anecdotally, think that we're better off with it than without it, although we have a lot of hate for it. I don't hear anybody saying that they want to give away, that they want to give up the email system, not on a full-time basis, at least. So sometimes it's hard to do a very fine analysis economically of a potential project. And that's okay, okay? So we're going to say sometimes we're going to do this just on the basis of being able to say that something fits a broad organizational need. And the quote here that we'd like to guide us is, it is better to measure gold roughly than to count pennies precisely. So there are some things that are hard to quantify and yet have a high value, and we want to make sure that we give them the credit that they're due. So for these kinds of projects, there are three things that we typically are going to look for. We're going to look for the fact that there's a need for the project. So a lot of people think we need a new email system. There are funds available for the project, and there's a strong will to make the project succeed. So there are some of these things that we're not going to do a very fine analysis on them. We're just going to say, this is one of these infrastructure type projects that we're going to do because they fit broad organizational needs and they meet the three criteria that we have towards the bottom of the slide. Sometimes it helps to categorize IT projects, and there's a lot of ways that you can categorize them, but one particularly productive one that helps is to really kind of analyze, well, why would you do this? Okay. Perhaps it's the project is a solution to a problem. Perhaps the project is capitalizing on an opportunity. And there's a lot of people who try to distinguish between problems and opportunities, but I'm going to say that an opportunity that your boss knows about is now your problem. Okay, so problems and opportunities are really different sides of the same coin. Okay, so when I talk about problem, I'm talking about opportunity and vice versa. Okay, a problem is an opportunity that you're accountable for. Okay, a directive, well, that's a problem of a sort too. It depends on who the directive's from. Perhaps this is legislation or some kind of a government executive order that we have to comply with, or we're going to have to start paying, or maybe our business executives are going to go to jail. Okay, so these kinds of categorizations can sometimes help us answer the question of how high the priority of this thing is. The more that it seems like a pressing problem, or there's a directive that will make it a pressing problem soon, the more that it has a high priority. the more that it seems like some vague opportunity that we can either do or not do, well then the priority seems less seems lower. Okay, so what's interesting is that as the priority gets higher, things start to look more and more like a problem. As the priority gets lower, things start to look like a big opportunity, then a smaller opportunity, then a really small opportunity, and then a vague opportunity. How could we decide by financial analysis what projects to do or what projects not to do? Well, in business school kinds of courses, we've been teaching people a long time to do financial analyses of potential projects. This is a process that the business people call capital budgeting. And the idea is your organization has a bunch of funds that are going to be spent, and which projects are you going to do? Okay, so the financial analysis is going to look at these projects from a financial point of view and saying, well, from a financial point of view, are these attractive or not? Okay, there are three calculations that people do. Net present value analysis is the one that the economists tend to recommend most highly, NPV. There's return on investment, or ROI, which I would say that most economists would say is inferior to net present value in terms of just how useful the numbers are. Interestingly, though, ROI and return on investment has become kind of a catchphrase in the management world. So people in organizations where they use financial calculations like net present value will call it ROI. So you can't ignore ROI just because of the buzzword presence that it has. And payback analysis is an interesting way to look at a project that way back in the day that I went to business school, it was pretty well discredited. You know, people said that payback analysis is old-fashioned. Well, the world has changed, and payback analysis has a new lease on life, and it's alive and well in the 21st century, so I'm going to tell you about that. So net present value calculations allow you to compare different scenarios based upon the time value of money. Now, we all understand the time value of money pretty basically. We know that if we're going to get paid by somebody, that they pay us sooner, we typically would accept a little bit less. And if they're going to pay us later, like a year later, we're going to expect more, because we're kind of giving them a loan for that period, say a 1-year loan. Okay, and how would we figure out how much different the payment should be? Well, it would depend on the rate of interest that we could earn on that money. Okay, so when we go to a bank or some other financial institution and we give them funds to make a time deposit, then we expect to give them the principal when we open the account, and we expect to get more when the account matures. Okay, so the amount that we would give them in the beginning is called the present value, and the amount that you get back in the end is called the future value. Okay. And it's also true that using these kinds of calculations, you can figure out not only just lump sum payments in the beginning or the end, but you can figure out a series of payments over time, like rent or a mortgage or a car payment. And so using the net present value calculations, if you know how much you need to borrow for your car, okay, or your house, and you know how many periods it's going to take, how many months, and you know the interest rate, you can use these kinds of calculations to figure out the payments. Well, what we're going to use it for is we're going to look at the income and expense streams over the life of a project and use that same kind of calculation that's used to figure out the value of a car loan. We're going to use it in order to figure out net, what is a project that's going to happen in the future worth today based upon all the costs that are going to be expended over time and based upon all the income that's going to come in over time. And usually we analyze it over some kind of a medium-term kind of period, like say 5 years, 3 years, somewhere between maybe 3 and 10 years. Okay, what are all the costs that are going to happen? What are all the either income that we're going to get or expense savings that we're going to get, and how do they relate to each other? What's the interest rate that we think is the right one for our organization to use? And we run the calculations and we get a number. Now let's see how that works. Okay, so here on slide 15, we've got two different projects, Project 1 and Project 2. We're trying to analyze them both. Theoretically, we want to choose between one or the other, okay? And what we do is we show in each year what the cash flows are, what the costs are, what the benefits are, and again, the costs are probably going to be cash out from us. The benefits could be people paying us things. It could be a revenue thing, or it could be a lessening of expenses. Okay, we could be spending, with the status quo, we could expect to pay $10,000 a year for something. If we do the new project, over time that's going to come down. Well, that's a benefit. It's not cash that somebody sends us, but it's less cash that we send to somebody else. So if we're looking under Project 1, we've got we have the benefit flow, we have the cost flow, and then the cash flow is the net of the two. And then you need two other things to make the calculation work. You need a discount rate, which is an annual rate of interest. And here we're saying 10%, which for current days is probably a little bit high. And then you need the number of periods. Okay, so we're saying 10% per year over 5 years. And what happens is that we run the calculation. This is a formula we would use in a spreadsheet right here. So a lot of people who are doing net present value calculations do it using tools like Excel. Okay. And they run it, and here what they've got is they've got $2,316 is what this series of cash flows is worth today. Okay, and it's kind of like the idea of you have a string of car payments, and then you say, well, what's this car worth today? Well, it's worth the net present value of all those payments at whatever interest rate you're paying. So we do that kind of analysis to two projects, and Project 1 gets a net present value of $23.16. Project 2 gets a net present value of $32.01. Now, what what the author would probably say is that, well, project 2 is more favorable than project 1. You should pick project 2. Okay? And I'm going to say maybe. And here's why. If these are in whole dollars, okay, what's the $1,000 difference to your organization today? I mean, there's some uncertainty about all the numbers. Okay, so how good are the estimates? Well, they're pretty good, but they're not. There's going to be some variability between the actuals and the estimates. Well, could they vary $1,000 over 5 years? I think they could. So for these, when I look at these, they're about the dead even. Okay, if this is in thousands of dollars. So if this is 2.3 million compared to 3.2 million, I think that project 2 is a dead bang winner and project 1 is a dead bang loser of the two. According to the financial theories, if you get a positive net present value, it's a favorable thing to do. If you get a negative net present value, you probably shouldn't do it at all because you're making yourself less wealthy by pursuing the project. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, we would probably say that when we go to do projects, if we're only looking at the financial side, we would calculate the net present value for each of the projects that we want to do, and then we would pick from the one with the highest net present value and then down lower and lower and lower till we ran out of funds. Okay, but we would never go down and do one that was negative because our analysis is saying that we would do better to do nothing. And we've all heard the challenge that they give to doctors: first, do no harm. Well, that's going to apply to us as managers as well. So here is an example for the JWD consulting project that we talked about in the last of the chapters. So we've got a discount rate of 8%. That's the interest rate. Now, the last time we used 10. Well, how do we figure out what that rate is? Well, typically you and I don't. Typically we go to financial people in our organization and we say, what kind of a rate should we use for our net present value calculations? And here's what those kind of people look at. They're typically the finance people. Typically we borrow money at a higher rate than we lend it out at, right? So if we go and get a car loan, we're paying maybe 6%. Okay. If we go and we deposit funds at the bank, we're probably getting 1% these days. So the rate that makes sense is somewhere from 1 to 6%. Okay, for individuals these days, probably. And the financial people think about things whether this organization is a net borrower or a net saver. And so how should they pick a rate between those two values? There's a whole kind of a cult to doing this, and it's above our pay grade. So somebody is going to give us a number, okay, somewhere between what we borrow at and what we lend at, and we're going to use that for our calculations. Here we're saying for JWD it's 8%. So we have the costs, we have the benefits. Here what they've done is use the formula to discount these cash flows. So we're looking at these things. So everything that we spend or get in year one is worth one for one. On the basis of this interest rate and the net present value calculations, this is year zero. This is right at the beginning of the project. In year one, things are worth 0.93 of their face value. And year two, they're worth 0.86. In year three, they're worth 0.79. So what we do is that we take the costs and we multiply them by the discount factor. And we say, in current dollar terms, this is what all this adds up to. So in current dollar terms, the net present value of the benefits is 243.2. I'm sorry, the costs. And then we look at the benefits and we apply the same kinds of discounts. And we typically don't get an immediate benefit from a project, but we might get some in year 1, 2, 3. So we discount each of those, and you see the discount factors are the same in each year because the interest rate's the same. So the sum of the discounted benefits is $516,000. So the net for the project, the whole project has a net present value of all the cash flows of $272,800. Okay. Now, let's talk ROI and let's talk payback. One of the nice things about net present value is that you can compare projects of unequal size. So you can take a big project and compare it to a small project. Okay, ideally, a big project, if it's very favorable, should have a very big positive net present value. It might not. Okay, it might have a low net present value if it's a bit of a dog. Okay, a small project, it's a little bit hard for it to get a really big net present value because of, that's probably why we're calling it small. Okay, but net present value is going to give you an estimate of the economic goodness of the project regardless of its size. So you can compare different size projects. Now, return on investment, which we're going to see in another slide, where are our return on investment calculations? Okay, so here we are on slide 18. It's the total discounted benefits minus the total discounted costs divided by the discounted costs. Okay, now here, bigger projects, here you can have a very small project in which you make a lot. So you give a very high percentage here. You might say you get a return on investment of 20%. And then you would have a big project and you'd say, well, you only get 10% on that. You'd say, well, the 20% one's a lot better. But because of the size of the projects, the 20% one is only throwing off maybe $100,000 worth of bottom line profit. The 10% one could be gigantic. It could be throwing off millions of dollars of profit. So that's why most economists think that comparing things on the basis of ROI is not a good idea. There's another thing that people do is that they try to figure out what the rate of interest would be that would that you'd have to use for the project to have a net present value of 0. And that's called internal rate of return, or IRR. And again, it has the problem that it's not comparable. You don't get a good way to compare projects of unequal size. So of ROI, IRR, and NPV, most financial people with a head on their shoulders will prefer to look at NPV, although the buzzword that people use for financial goodness is what's the ROI? Okay. Now, in some places, they may actually be doing return on investment calculations, but in most sensible places, they're calculating the net present value. So NPV is still the winner. It's been the winner for the past 50 years. What about payback? Let's look at that. The payback period is the amount of time it would take to recoup in the form of net cash inflows the total dollars invested in the project. So this says, at what point does the net of the cash flows equal zero? And the idea is that we intend that in a typical project, it starts out negative, and then we close the gap and we cross over into positive. And we expect it to stay positive indefinitely. Okay, so we're thinking that there's one crossover point. And that point, when you look at it on a timeline, is going to say what the payback period is. So payback occurs when the net cumulative discounted benefits equal the net cumulative discounted costs. Okay? Many organizations on IT projects have a fairly short payback period. Well, when I went to business school, payback had some problems. Okay? Payback had the problem that people did not, 40 years ago, they did not calculate the time value of money when they calculated the payback. So all this kind of stuff where we say from the net cash inflows, from the discounted this and the discounted that, they didn't discount things for the time value of money. So much of the reason why people thought that payback analysis was not a good idea is it didn't take into consideration time value of money. Well, the new payback does. Okay, it didn't take all that much to consider the time value of money. So now we fixed that. Now, what else has happened? Well, in the 40 so years since I went to business school, the uncertainty in the economy is tremendously higher. And people's jobs in the top of these organizations are much more precarious. And so they're looking at the following thing, okay? Yes, it's important to look at what projects are going to return financially, but are they going to return it financially in some kind of a useful period, okay? Now, what are the useful periods? Well, one has to do with the tenure of the management team that wants to make the decision. If, in fact, in the world that we're in, that senior management, top management gets 5 years to to show what they can do, and if they don't do it in that time, then they're out the door. Well, how much of that 5 years is left? Is it 5 years? Is it 2.5 years? Is it a half a year? Okay. Well, that management team is going to be looking for projects that pay off positively in a relevant time frame for them. Likewise, in university presidents tend to last 5 years. Governors last 4 years. Mayors last typically 4 years. Okay, so it doesn't make sense for these guys to invest in projects that are going to make things look worse in their time. Okay, it's just human nature is such that they're not going to want to do it. So they're going to want to look at the payback analysis, and that they're going to want to know that it's going to pay off. It's going to turn positive in their employment lifetime. The other thing is this. I think we're in a much more volatile world than we were in 40 years ago. Okay, And whenever we do this kind of analysis, we're taking kind of a crystal ball. We're saying, what are the benefits? Well, we're projecting them. We're predicting the future. What are the costs? Well, we're projecting those. Okay, now, generally speaking, we're better at predicting the near future than the distant future. Okay? Or people believe that we are. Whether we are or not is another question entirely. But so the question becomes, if this is going to pay back in half a year, is the world going to change in half a year? Probably not. In a year? Maybe a little. In 2 years? Well, it could change a bit. It depends on what kind of activity your organization is involved in. In 5 years? Yeah, pretty substantially in all kinds of activities. So one of the reasons that payback analysis has become so important is with the volatility of the world in which we're making these assumptions, and with the difficulty that leaders have been hanging on to their leadership position, people want to know that they're committing to things that are going to be fairly sure things, and they going to want to know that they are committing to things that are going to pay off in a useful time frame for them. So this has been a big shot in the arm for payback analysis. It's totally rehabilitated from the time I went to business school until now. So this is typically people would want to take a look at the net present value, and they'd also want a payback analysis because they want to know, is that net present value is how long is it going to take us to get to the good part, and is it going to be soon enough to really help the current management team? So with this in mind, let's go back and take a look at the numbers on the JWD project. Let's see. So the net present value is $272,800. That's significantly positive. So that looks like a healthy project. It would be interesting to see what alternative projects are for this organization. Return on investment is 112%. Now that sounds interesting, but I'm just going to go out and be kind of bold and say I don't care what the return on investment is, because I'm a lot more interested intellectually in net present value. And the payback is 1 year, and I do like that because, if we're going to get well in about a year, then I'm okay. And then everything after a year, it's going to look better and better and better. And maybe I figure that I'm around for at least a year, hopefully 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And this is going to be good for the organization, and it's not going to work against me. Okay, now that may seem a little self-serving, but human nature being what it is, it's very hard for people to do things that are against their personal interest. Okay, and that's why payback is as important as it really is. All right, so that's the financial stuff. Okay, and I want to put a lot of emphasis on it because my typical student doesn't have a lot of experience in this area. And if you're going to be a project manager, and if you're going to be involved, especially in this kind of selection process for projects, people are going to be thinking like this. They're going to be doing these kind of analyses, and they're going to be talking. And I want to get you comfortable with the concepts. Okay. Oh, so here's a diagram of the payback. So you can see that the cost line and the benefit line as a discounted for net present value are crossing at the 1 year mark. Okay, there's a whole bunch of approaches that can be accommodated with a weighted scoring model. Okay. Well, what kind of approaches? Well, perhaps we could give a certain amount of weight to financial goodness. Okay. Typically, what I do when I'm coming up with the weighted scoring model is I base it on a score of 100. Okay. So here's a scoring system for project selection. We've got 4 projects. Okay. We see it's a spreadsheet. So we have the weight, 25%, 15%. If you add them all up, they add to 100% or 100 points. Okay. Now we go over and we score each of the projects on a score of 1 to 100. So 100 is as good as it gets. 0 is not good at all. And so you can see that we've scored these things. One's a 90, one's a 70. And what are the categories? Supports key business objectives, has strong internal sponsor, has strong customer support, uses realistic level of technology, can be implemented in 1 year or less, provides a positive net present value, has a low risk in meeting scope, time, and cost goals. So what we're trying to do is get a broad array of considerations, and then we give them what we consider are the appropriate weight, and then we score them, and so then we see what turns out on top. Okay, so what's interesting here is we have one that's well above, so it's 78.5. So we definitely want to do that. We've got one that's well below, it's 41.5, and we probably don't want to do that if we can only do 3 of the 4. These 2 that are 50 and 56, I go back to how accurate is the scoring? Is the scoring accurate enough that a difference of 6 points is really going to make a difference? I'm not sure. Okay. So 50 and 56 in my mind, they seem kind of similar to each other. And if I can pick them both, that's good. If I have to pick one or over the other, well, then it's going to be difficult for me because it's only 6 points. A lot of people look at these kind of systems and they say, well, Kevin, the problem is that they're subjective. And they are, okay? The good thing is that they're subjective in a useful way, okay? I don't mind the fact that we all have to make subjective decisions, okay? And then, the fact is we have to find a way to justify them. And I find if I take a group of people and I ask them to score things, and then I get them into a room and say, okay, supports key business objectives. Okay, now we have a 90 and we have a 90 and a 50. This 50 seems awfully low. How committed are we? What were people's individual scores for that? I'm looking for consensus. If in the scoring we have people are scoring things pretty similarly, that's fine. If they're scoring things pretty differently, well, then I'm going to want to try to talk it through and see if we can get closer together on individual scores. The other thing is that when we look at the final weighted scores, if we're really disappointed by them, if we go, oh, gee, project 2 is so high, I hate project 2, then you really have to ask yourself, did you set up the criteria the right way? Okay, what is it that you're trying to achieve? If you look at the answer that comes out of a weighted scoring model, and you feel that what should be an attractive project is not scoring as it should, or what should be an unattractive project is scoring too high, then I think you have to ask yourselves, how did you set up the model? And is it realistic? And maybe you need to go back and change the model. Okay, so Yes, it's subjective, but I think it can be managed in a pretty attractive way. So that's weighted scoring model. Balanced scorecard is a particular approach to measuring goodness of the company endeavors that was created by Kaplan and Norton. And there is a URL here for their webpage. And if you would like to know more, I would direct you to that. Okay. Take a stop here. What have we done so far? Well, we have done the stuff that comes before project management. Okay. We have done a pre-initiation. We have done a project selection, okay? All that stuff happens before project management actually starts, because the first part of project management, the first process group, is initiation, okay? So all that stuff we just talked about is how to get ready to get started right here, okay? And I'm going to take a pause here and get a drink, and I'll be right back. Okay, so in getting a project started, there's a couple of things that we would like to do. We have a document that's a project charter, and people talk about these as though they're magic. Well, they're not magic. They do have a certain kind of a formality. I think one of the reasons we call it the charter is that's the kind of stuff that brings an organization into being, or a country into being, or something like that. So we have this, this is what brings a project into being. But what really brings a project into being is an agreement of the parties on what the parameters of the project should be, and that a group of key stakeholders agrees that we ought to go forward with the project. So the project charter as a document is an embodiment of the agreement that this important group of people have. Okay, so what are the key parts of creating a charter? Getting the right group of people, okay? Making sure that they have an informed collective understanding of what we're doing, and that they are close enough to agreeing that when they agree that they're doing something that's responsible. And then we get a consensus, and we get the facts down in the charter, and we get people to sign off. Okay. And the signing off on the document is just a formal way to say we collectively agree on this. Now, these turn out to be very helpful, because you'll find people who forget. Things change over the course of a project, and people will often say at the end of the project, well, I'm really disappointed that we didn't do A, B, and C. And you go, well, let's go back and look at the charter and see if we initially thought we would get to A, B, and C. And then you look at it and you go, they're not in there. They go, oh, geez, yeah. We didn't think of those things until later. Gosh, I wish we'd thought of those at the beginning. Okay, so people don't always remember accurately about what they thought at a certain point in time. And project charters has a way of documenting the consensus, but actually documenting the set of facts as they are at that time. And sometimes when you look back, you're a little surprised about what they were. So what would the inputs for developing a charter be? A project statement of work. So that would be a description of all the work that's in the project. A business case, some kind of economic justification for doing the project. Maybe some things that came out of some kind of pre-initiation. Agreements. Okay, so maybe we've agreed to buy some software or provide some services, okay? So they create a context for your project. Enterprise environmental factors. Now, this is a great PMI term that refers to what's the state of the environment in which this project is going to go on. Do we have staff? Do we have funding? Do we have time? Do we have technical capability? What do we have? And of course, the famous organizational process assets, which include formal and informal plans, policies, procedures, guidelines, whatever. Organizational process assets are documents of a certain kind, okay, that relate to our project. Okay, so we're going to cobble together a charter. So here on slide number 26, you see the one from the book. It's for the DNA sequencing instrument completion project. And there's some interesting stuff here. We've got dates, we've got key schedule milestones, we've got budget information, project manager, project objectives, main success criteria, approach, and most importantly, we have a list of key stakeholders and their approval. Okay, now does every project charter look exactly like this? No. Okay, but when you look at the categories here, these are the kinds of things that people need to agree upon in order to be properly engaged in a project together. Does every project have a document that's formal? No. In some organizations, there are other documents. There are forms that people fill out and they sign. So they don't look exactly like this. Sometimes if we have a vendor who's doing this for a client, maybe they have a contract and a statement of work that talk about what it is. Maybe they have a letter of understanding. Maybe they have an engagement letter. I would say to you as a PM, if you're going to be doing a project for somebody, that at a minimum, if you have a meeting, that you ought to have a meeting in which you all agree that you're pursuing the project and what the general parameters are. And you as the PM should document that meeting in some kind of an email and send it to people and say, here's what we've agreed to, and this is what we're going to pursue. Please let me know if you have any corrections. Okay, so we need it written somewhere so we have something to go back to. Okay, doesn't have to be quite as formal as you see in the book, but you need to have something. Having a charter, then you need a plan. So what's in a project management plan? It's a document used to coordinate all planning documents and help to guide a project's execution and control. Plans created in the order of knowledge areas are subsidiary parts of the overall project management plan. So we think that a good project plan has something in it related to each of the knowledge areas. So as we go through each of them, we're going to tell you what parts relate to planning. Okay? Now, when you think about having a couple of planning documents from all 13 of the knowledge areas, that adds up to a pretty big project plan. Okay? So the question is, how do you have the size of the project plan relate well to the size of your project? And smaller projects, less expensive projects are probably going to have less extensive project plans. But it's incumbent upon the project manager and the other stakeholders to come to an understanding of how big and how formal the project plan is going to be. And it should have a sensible relationship to the size of the overall project. Common elements in a project management plan: introduction or overview, description of project organization, management and technical processes used on the project, work to be done, the schedule, the budget information. Do we have some more things? No, that's all we have. So that's not too bad. Okay. I just want, and now we have something here too. Here's a table of contents on slide 30 from a project management plan for a software project. And we've taken this out of an IEEE standard. So the overview, project organization, managerial process plans, technical process plans, supporting process plans. That's pretty long and formal. Okay. So if we were building a new product for a completely new group of people that was, they were spending a lot of money and taking a lot of time, and we didn't know each other well, might I say that this would be a good table of contents for a project plan? Yeah, it might be. Okay. If we were doing a small project for a group of people who we know well, and this is another project in a series of like projects we've already done, something this big is maybe overkill. Okay. Now, a couple of interesting things about project plan documents. Okay. One is some of the things that people want to know in here, like what's your managerial process and what's your technical process. Well, some of these are standard in your organization. So there are documents and standards that are part of your governance of your IT organization, for instance, or your project organization that describe how you do things. So in your project plan, you might just refer to them and incorporate them by reference. You should say, we're going to follow sections 1 through 32 of the XYZ organization managerial process manual, and the same thing for the technical. So you don't have to recreate things every time. And then the other thing is, it's pretty common for project managers to take a part of one plan from a project they've already done, and to use it and clone it to create the next one. So don't get so overwhelmed by the suggestion here that we ought to have a pretty hefty project plan. Some of this stuff is boilerplate, and some of this stuff can be tailored from project to project. Okay, so not to worry too hard. Okay, so what do the winners do? Well, according to this study, the winners clearly spell out what needs to be done in a project, by whom, when, and how. For this, they use an integrated toolbox, including PM tools, methods, and techniques. If a scheduling template is developed and used over and over, it becomes a repeatable action that leads to higher productivity and lower uncertainty. So what is interesting here is that there seems to be a theme that is consistent between the research and the anecdotal evidence that would say that organizations that have a way they do things, they have tools, they have policies, they have the project manager doesn't have to invent all this stuff. They just have to learn it and do it. There's a real reduction in the risk of the overall project. To the extent that we have a way that we do things and we're doing it project after project after project, there's an efficiency to it. There's a quality aspect of it. And so if you look at the organizations who are doing well, they don't have every project manager reinventing the wheel every time they do a new project. Okay, now we come to the next part, directing and managing project work. It involves managing and performing the work described in the project plan. The majority of time and money is spent here. The application area of the project directly affects the project execution because the products of the project are produced during execution. So here's where you really have to know the subject matter of the project, because here's where the rubber meets the road. Coordinating planning and execution. So project planning and execution should be intertwined. Those who will do the work, if possible, should help to plan the work. Now, this is ideal, okay? Research would indicate that people who help to develop the plan have a much higher commitment to meeting the plan than people who are working a plan developed by someone else. We also need to provide leadership and supportive culture. So project managers must lead by example to demonstrate the importance of creating and then following good project plans. Now, I just want to point out that Kathy Schwalbe has had this slide for a long time, and I know what she means, okay? And here's what I think she means, and I think it's good. I think she says, project managers should practice what they preach. So if they say that we should have a plan for things, then they ought to have a plan for those things. If they say that we ought to run meetings well, then they ought to run their own well. If they say that we ought to communicate in a certain way, then they ought to communicate in that way themselves. So they ought to demonstrate for their team what good behavior is. Fully signed up for that. Okay. Now, people don't always follow your lead. Okay. So you've got to be prepared to see whether people are following your lead or not. Identify the people who are and praise them. Identify the people who aren't and try to educate them and intervene to get them onto the path that you want them to be on. People following you doesn't happen automatically. Now, if you don't model good behavior, it's going to be very hard for them to follow. But modeling good behavior is a necessary but not sufficient formula for success in this area. And this is what I like to add to this slide. Capitalizing on product, business, and application knowledge. So it's often helpful for IT PMs to have prior technical experience. On small project, the PM may be required to perform some of the technical work or to mentor the team members. On large project, the project manager must understand the business and application area of the project. So, again, I kind of want to tailor this. I think a project manager who doesn't understand the business and application area of the project is at a disadvantage. Okay, so if people in the business can understand the business and the application, then the project manager has to have some level of understanding of it. They have to understand why we're doing things and not other things. Now, whether they also are going to have the technical capability to do some of the technical tasks themselves, this is a staffing issue, okay? In some places, we spread our project managers around, and so if we're not using 100% of a project manager on one project, then we have them manage two. So we don't have them do the technical work. In other places, we tend to dedicate one person to one project. And if there's not 100% full-time job for a PM doing the PM work, then they're going to do some technical work as well. So you need to have the capabilities for whatever your circumstances are. But I really think that on projects of any size, you had better come to understand the business and application area of the project, or you're dead meat. So, what are some project execution tools and techniques? So, we're talking about expert judgment, meetings, project management information systems. Expert judgment, we can go to other people who know about our kinds of projects, and we can ask them what our plan should be, whether we seem to be turning out good work, okay? We're not the only people in the world. There are people who know more than us, and we ought to tap into them. Meetings. Since projects are collaborative, meetings are important. Now, it's kind of interesting because there are projects where it's just meeting. And the people who are taking the agile approach have really kind of drawn the line. And they've said, look, we're going to have a meeting every day in which we're going to coordinate. And apart from that, we're going to try to keep the meetings to a minimum. Okay? We don't want lots of meetings with too many people where we're droning on about solving problems that other people don't care about. So your ability to lead a meeting is important. It's not just the meetings you have, it's the meetings you don't have. Okay? So meetings are an important tool when used wisely. And project management information systems, we've come to the point where it's pretty common for us to use software tools to keep information about the project, the tests in it, the estimates, all the deliverables, what's been approved, what versions of things are current, all the kind of stuff, all that kind of information management that would be important to our clients and the work that we're doing for them. We have to bring that to our own work. Monitoring and controlling project work. Changes are a big item, okay? Changes are inevitable on most projects, so it's important to develop and follow a process to monitor and control changes. Monitoring and project work includes collecting, measuring, and disseminating performance information. A baseline is the approved project management plan plus any approved changes. So when it comes to managing change, there is a bit of a difference between the traditional deterministic waterfall kind of approach and the agile sort of approach. In the agile sort of approach, well, when we come up with requirements, we write them up briefly as a user story, and we put them on the backlog and we prioritize them. We completely believe that there will be some of those that we'll never see again, that they'll spend all their life on the backlog. They never become important enough to us to do more detailed planning on, and we'll never do them. Okay, so the question of exactly how much of the scope fits into the project is an open question which we discover over the life of the project. Not so in the waterfall kind of approach. In the waterfall kind of approach, we claim to know that we can come up with estimates in the beginning of what is going to fit into the project. Well, the fact is that that's not true. Okay. First of all, even when we know exactly what has to be in the project, we sometimes are wrong about how much effort that's going to take. Okay, so we can be wrong there. And we're also wrong in that as we go through the project, we learn more about what's important, what's not. Some things that we thought were going to be in the project are all of a sudden less important. Some things that we hadn't thought about are more important. So there's this ongoing process of adjusting the scope of the project. What's in, what's out, what's a little bigger, what's a little smaller. Okay, so whereas in Agile, this sort of evolving understanding of the scope and the time and the cost of the project is kind of dealt with by the backlog management process. In more traditional projects, we have change controls. So at any one point, we have an expression of the scope of the project, the time, schedule for the project, the expected cost of the project. We're at least pretending to ourselves that we know enough to commit to all that. Then every time there's a change, we have to go and say, okay, people propose changes, then we have to say, do we want to consider that? If we want to consider that, then we have to go estimate its impact. Then we estimate the impact, then we decide, are we going to include it or not? We're going to change the scope. Are we going to change the budget? Are we going to change the schedule? Okay, there's a lot of overhead to it. So this process is often referred to as integrated change control. The three main objectives of integrated change control are influencing the factors that create changes to ensure that changes are beneficial, determining that change has occurred, managing actual changes as they occur. Okay, so there's a bit more work in managing change in a traditional project than there is in an Agile project, because of the idea that, at least in theory, we've committed to all of the requirements that we've identified. Okay, so to the extent that all of a sudden we can't fit them in, then we're going to have to talk about a change that moves them out of scope. Whereas in an Agile backlog kind of situation, things just don't get to the top of the list or the bottom of the list, depending upon how you write the backlog. And things don't get to the part of the list where we do them, and we have this idea that the list is not going to be empty when we're done. While here in the more traditional approach, we say that the list is going to be empty when we're done. So we're going to keep changing the list formally as we go along. It's a different approach. Okay, so change control on IT projects. The former view, the really old school view, was the project team should strive to do exactly what was planned on time and within the budget. The problem with that is the stakeholders rarely agreed up front on the project scope, and time and cost estimates were not accurate. The modern view is that project management is the process of constant communication and negotiation. So the solution is that changes in the scope are often beneficial, and the project team should plan for them. Okay? Well, this is what's interesting. What's the real difference between this point of view and the Agile point of view? I'm going to suggest to you that the difference is that the Agile people don't claim to know everything. Okay? They say we're going to adjust as we go along. These people say that we're going to adjust as we go along. But the Agile people are saying we're only going to do as much as fits into our project. Here, in the more traditional approach, we're going to say we're always going to have a comprehensive plan. As soon as we have a change and we agree to put more into the project or take things out of the project, we're going to come back with a comprehensive updated plan. Now that's a lot of planning work, but that's what the commitment is. Successful projects have change control systems, so it's a formal documented process that describes when and how official project documents and work may be changed. It describes who is authorized to make changes and how to make them. So we have a way that we do it. Change just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen informally. It happens in a formal way. In some projects, we have a change control board. Okay, now this is especially true in very big projects where we have a lot of competing interests. And of course, if we gave everybody everything they wanted, we would never get done. So then how do we decide what gets done and what doesn't get done? Well, a very useful thing is to have a group of senior managers and or executives who review the changes. And they say, yeah, we're going to expand here. No, we're not going to expand there. Now, the only problem with that kind of approach is that it sometimes isn't responsive enough. So what a lot of organizations do is that they have a clause that says that the project team can send out a proposed change to the change control board and say, we want you to evaluate this, and if we don't get an answer in a certain length of time, like 48 hours, 72 hours, we're going to proceed as though it's approved. Okay, that is a typical way that we get around the potential unresponsiveness of committee-based things. Now, of course, if you wear that out, you're probably going to get in big trouble and you won't be the PM anymore. That whole process is what we're describing here on slide number 43. Okay. Global issues. I don't like this slide. We're not talking about it. Configuration management. Okay. This is a big issue. Okay. In a traditional project that we're doing with the waterfall method, okay, in the beginning of the project, we create paper plans and specifications, right? So as we go through the project and we have changes, are we going to maintain those, right? Well, at least in the beginning, I think we should. So we can always go back and say what version of the specifications is the correct one, okay? Then we create software, right? And then, of course, we have changes to software. So now we need to know what version is the correct one. So there is a process in either the traditional or the agile world. In the agile world, you only have to keep track of software because you're not creating a lot of specification documents. You might create some. You might come up with, well, the ones that we talked about, the artifacts from Agile. So to the extent that those things change, you're going to want to be able to make sure that you've got the current version of them. But you're also going to want to make sure you have the current version of the software. If you go back to more traditional projects, you've got two groups of things. You've got the original specifications, and you've got the code that implements the system, and you've got to decide whether you're going to keep them both up to date going forward. Most project teams keep the specifications up to date at least through the initial implementation. That means that they need to do change, that they need to do version control on all the specifications and plans, plus all the actual code. In Agile, it's a little bit less challenging. this keeping track of versions of things and what is the current one and making sure that we don't have the wrong one by mistake is known collectively as configuration management. And it's pretty important stuff. Here are some suggestions for performing integrated change control on an IT project. So this is there's one slide one. So view project management as a process, a constant communication and negotiation, plan for change, establish a formal change control system, use effective configuration management, define procedures for making timely decisions on smaller changes, use written and oral performance reports to help identify and manage change, use project management and other software to help manage and communicate change, focus on leading the project team and meeting overall project goals and expectations. Right? So I would say that change control is at the heart of good traditional project management, and it's the heart of agile project management as well, because we're always asking ourselves what's going to be in and what's going to be out. In agile, we're typically talking about okay, what's the next group of things that we want to do, but we're also talking about do we really need all these things on the project backlog, right? Maybe we've got some things on the project backlog that are completely hopeless now. We're never going to get to them. We're not even interested in getting them anymore. Then let's get them off the backlog, which is say that we're going to put them on some list for people to think about for some other project. Okay, so these two processes significantly different in terms of what they claim, how much we know at any one time. The traditional approach, we can come up with a coherent overall plan and keep it up to date as we go. The agile approach, we can come up with a plan for the project in some kind of general sense that we think we're going to do good things, and then we're going to commit to exactly what parts of it we're going to do as we feel our way through the project. So these are, in terms of their orientation, very different, but in terms of the day-to-day fabric of this stuff, we're all looking at potential changes and we're either including them or excluding them on an everyday basis. So even two approaches that are philosophically pretty different from each other in practice have a lot of similarities. Closing projects or phases. So to close a project or phase, you must finalize all the activities and transfer the completed or canceled work to the appropriate people. The main outputs include the final product, service, or result transition, and organizational process asset updates, which means we ought to keep all this documentation that we've thrown out. We ought to make sure that we save it and we save the best versions of it. What kind of software can we use in this kind of endeavor? A lot of the documents we're talking about can be created with word processing software. There's a lot of presentations having to do with meetings and kickoffs and all that. Although I've got to tell you, the Agile people are not fond of PowerPoint presentations. So probably if we're talking about PowerPoint presentations, we're not talking about the Agile guys. Tracking can be done with spreadsheets or databases. The Agile people are more likely to do this on a whiteboard or with some kind of tool that's going to feed something like the burn down chart. Communication software can facilitate communication, so project websites, project wikis, blogs, all those things. Project management software can pull everything together and show a detailed and summarized information. So all these project management tracking systems have both detailed and summary reports. And these are the kinds of portfolio management software reports that you get out of some of these more bigger view kinds of products. So you definitely can get something like that out of something like a plan view or the big version of the Microsoft project set of tools. Here's something from something called projectmanager.com that takes kind of a big view of multiple projects. And that's it. So what we've really tried to do is to show you the fabric of this whole thing, okay? This integration management is the secret sauce. It's pulling it all together. All of the really important things like the charter, the project plan, closing the project, reporting on the monitoring and controlling activities, all these really managerial things that have to be done fall into the knowledge area for this integration. So it really is a key area. And while we're going through it, we were able to kind of talk our way through most of the project process. So hopefully all those things have come together for you. So having covered all that, I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye-bye.